things. Good. So they say continue. So it's one of the most reproduced pictures, images since then. And when you look at that picture, there's always the sense of what do you see when you look at that picture. And when I've asked people in the past, what do they see? What words would they use to describe what they see? And the words that come up are beautiful, unique, dynamic, kind of teeming with life. But also oftentimes the word fragile is used to describe that picture. It's an interesting experience and exercise in spiritual work as well, because we all are familiar, I think, with Lectio Divina, which is looking and listening and reading the Word of God and allowing that word to take root in us and to resonate within us. But there's also a very beautiful exercise called Vizio Divina, that you would look at pictures, icons, statues, and just kind of allow those images to kind of speak to us in a very simple way. It might be an icon that you have on your wall, it may be a sacred picture, maybe the crucifix. I'm always intrigued by a crucifix that the Jesus head is always leans to the right. I've never seen a crucifix where his head leans to the left. So it's just a curiosity in my own imagination. But as you all know, the old Star Trek star, William Shatner, went up in space yesterday, and she went on Jeff Bezos' spaceship, and they only went up 66 miles, and they lasted for about 11 minutes total in the whole flight. And after he came down, William Shatner was asked what his experience was. And he said, "I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself, I seem to have been like a boy playing on the seashore, while the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me." Again, that whole reality of the mystery of the universe and how delicate the balance is between us and all of life. Indeed, the blue marble is our home, and Pope Francis is asking us to take care of it. And I remember a story that I tell about the late William McNamara, Carmelite spiritual director and writer, and when he was asked to do a retreat for what he thought was a group of co-eds. And when he got there, he found out there was just a group of children in elementary school. And so he's trying to adapt for the younger crowd the theme that he was trying to present to the older crowd. And his theme was really to try to encourage them to be the best that they could, because that's what God created us to be the best that we can be. And he said, when God created flowers, he asked the flowers to be very flowery, because that's the best they can be. And when God created dogs, he asked the dogs to be doggy, because that's the best they could be. And so then he asked the little munchkins, well, what do you think about us? What do you think that we should do? The little hand goes up and says, we should be peoply. And I think indeed that's what God asks of us, to do the best that we can. But let's go to the next slide. You may have seen this before, but this is Priscilla the Parrotfish. It's 16 feet long, 1,500 pounds, and this is a sculpture made up of all this stuff washed up from the ocean. And is put together to just show what we as human beings do with our environment. And it was made by a nonprofit organization called Washed Ashore, Art to Save the Sea. And it's just a reminder of just how peoply we are, how well we are caring for this gift that God has given us. And indeed, just to be kind of complimented, there's also what's called Stanley the Sturgeon, which is made up of all the things that have washed up on lake shores and riverbanks. But I think these two pictures, the blue marble and the Priscilla the Parrotfish, kind of say to us what the dilemma is. That is, on the one hand, there is a beauty of the world and a natural desire to protect it. But on the other hand, we're not doing a very good job. And it's the outlook that Pope Francis brings in writing Laudato Si. So if we go to the next slide, these are the opening lines of the Encyclical. St. Francis of Assisi reminds us that our common home is like a sister with whom we share our life, and a beautiful mother who opens her arms to embrace us. This sister now cries out to us because of the harm we have inflicted on her by our irresponsible use and abuse of the goods with which God has endowed her. We have come to see ourselves as her lords and masters, entitled to plunder her at will. Indeed, when we think about that challenge that the Pope says right from the very beginning, I think that we realize that the task before us is large, and for some it seems almost impossible. So I'd like to go and just to reflect upon what we might be looking for in the encyclical itself. And if we go to the next slide, I think that there are 4 themes that kind of course through Francis' words in this encyclical. And from the very beginning of the encyclical, Francis invites us to consider the world in a relational way. That is to say, there is a reciprocal dynamic between ourselves and nature. Whatever affects one affects the other. And throughout Francis' writings, he talks a great deal about encounter. Whenever you read his books, his encyclicals, his talks, that word encounter comes up again and again. So if we reverence and respect one another's dignity, then we have the same reverence and respect for the world around us. We don't overpower, but we empower. And as we relate to one another in our personal relationships, so too there's the same attitude in our attitude towards nature. These 2 themes, relational and encounter, emphasize what Pope Paul recently wrote about in his latest encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, which is on fraternity and social friendship. I always have to smile at that title, Fratelli Tutti. It sounds like an ice cream flavor, you know? But it's a wonderful, wonderful encyclical. And it's one of those emphasis that he always tries to kind of weave into what he writes, relation, encounter. And like Francis of Assisi, who had such an intimate relationship with nature, the Pope encourages kind of a spirituality of ecology. And as a spiritual director, I encourage those with whom I meet to recognize how God is working within all of the dimensions of our personal life. And Pope Francis is urging us to see the world with that same lens of faith. Because a few months after he was elected Pope, Francis issued his first encyclical, which is Lumen Fidei, the light of faith. It was the conclusion of the year of faith, and he continued the thinking of Benedict. You can see the next slide. And he wrote there is an urgent need to see once again that faith is a light. For once the flame of faith dies out, all other lights begin to dim. The light of faith is unique because it is capable of illuminating every aspect of human existence, A light this powerful cannot come from ourselves, but from a primordial source. In a word, it must come from God. Faith is born of an encounter, that word again, an encounter with the living God who calls us and reveals his love, a love which precedes us and upon which we can lean for security and for building our lives. Transformed by this love, we gain fresh vision, new eyes to see. We realize that it contains a great promise of fulfillment and that a vision of the future opens up before us. Indeed, that phrase reminds us of the Old Testament wisdom that without a vision, the people perish. Indeed, what is needed is conversion, and that's that fourth principle that I outlined: relational, encounter, eco-spirituality, and also conversion. Not just on a personal level, but on a global level as well. It would be a global ecological conversion. And COVID, if nothing else, has been a stark reminder of just how connected we are, how interdependent we are throughout the whole world. And just as there is an international effort to respond to that COVID, so too with the response to the issue of ecology. But before we go into the encyclical itself, I want to just kind of piggyback on what Father Steve said in terms of some context, in terms of where this encyclical fits. Laudato Si was written back in 2015, and it is the most current expression, and I think the most thorough expression of the church's teaching, papal teaching, but all the church is concerned about the environment. And again, in his most recent encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, the Holy Father makes a reference to what he writes and calls a throwaway culture, a throwaway world. And he says this: persons who are no longer seen as of paramount value to be cared for and respected, especially when they are poor and disabled, not yet useful like the unborn, or no longer needed like the elderly. We have grown indifferent to all kinds of wastefulness, starting with the waste of food, which is deplorable to the extreme. But starting way back, as Father Steve mentioned, with Paul VI in 1971, and continuing with John Paul II and Benedict, Catholic leadership has expressed concern about what is happening to the environment. And they echo the concerns of other churches, other scientists, other teachers and groups. And fundamental to them all is the conviction that climate change is real, is happening, not a hoax, not fake news, and we need to do something about it. If we go to the next slide. There. This is a statement by the United States Catholic bishops back in 2001. And the statement comes from their title there, The Global Climate Change, a Plea for Dialogue, Prudence, and the Common Good. And they say, as bishops, we make no independent judgment on the plausibility of global warming. Rather, we accept the consensus findings of so many scientists. Responsible scientific research is always careful to recognize uncertainty and is modest in its claims. Yet, over the past few decades, the evidence of global climate change and the emerging scientific consensus about the human impact on this process have led many governments to reach the conclusion that they need to invest time, money, and political will to address the problems through collective international action. The virtue of prudence is paramount in addressing climate change. And prudence is intelligence applied to our actions. I like that definition. It allows us to discern what constitutes the common good in a given situation. Significant levels of scientific consensus justifies, indeed can obligate, our taking action intended to avert potential dangers. Now that's our bishop speaking 20 some years ago about the whole issue. I don't know if any of us remember that was being taught and have heard any further comments from them, but at least they are on the side of recognizing that this is something important and that they're trying to encourage everyone to be able to respond to it. But even though there is this kind of groundswell of voices speaking out, and they speak with statistical persuasion about about climate change, so why the resistance? Next slide. First of all, there's a lot of powerful opposition. Powerful opposition from lots of different places. Economics, with one form of change in terms of like our solar energy, how does that impact the coal and oil industries? So in other words, there's a powerful opposition and conflicting interest groups that are vying to have attention. And quite frankly, there seems to be a general lack of interest in just people in general. There's a denial of the problem. We hear that from even the highest sources in our government. There's also this kind of indifference, a feeling of, well, it's not my problem. They'll solve it. But maybe more especially, there's that resignation that nothing can be done. And I know there's some Christian groups, some churches that kind of say, well, this is the end. This is the Armageddon. We just have to let it go out, and we just have to go read Revelation and all these things that are happening as a sign of the end times. So we just have to kind of be good so that we're not going to suffer from this. And also, and Pope Francis refers to this last reason often. There's this blind reliance on technical solutions without any kind of value judgment made on them, or any kind of challenge for behavioral changes on the part of all of us. We just think that science is going to solve the problem. I think case in point is with the COVID vaccines. The vaccines are out there. They're certainly a preventative measure, but how do we change attitudes? How do we change behavioral changes in order for this to be something that we can battle together? So let's go then to a kind of an outline. The next slide, please. These are the titles of the 6 chapters of the Encyclical. What's Happening, Gospel of Creation, Human Roots of the Ecological Crisis, Integral Ecology, Lines of Approach and Action, Ecological Education and Spirituality. So what I'd like to do is just to kind of do a cursory review. I'm going to come back to the 2nd chapter, Gospel of Creation, a little bit more at length. And so as we can see, the environment has been a part of church teaching for decades. And Francis wants his encyclical to be a part of the church's social justice teaching. And the encyclical is dense, and it's very thorough. And it would take more than just one presentation like this to unpack it. So let's just take a quick overview of each of the chapters. The next slide, please. What's happening? What's happening to our common home is the question. Francis is directing his thoughts to everyone on the planet to pay attention to what's happening. And some of the topics that are considered in this chapter, first of all, pollution. And he has this wonderful line in the encyclical that says, the earth our home is beginning to look like a large pile of filth. Guess all we have to do is drive down any road to see what's discarded so cavalierly on the side of the road. I know which beer has beer on sale because there's more of those beer cans in the gutters than before. And unfortunately now some of that discarded stuff are face masks and these spray pure hand purifies. So they're done with them and then they toss them. Also, the speed of change. We all experience that. That's what's happening so quickly, not only with climate change, but all other dimensions of world. A theme that's probably very relevant to all of us is water. The quality of water, the quantity of water. I mean, we are dealing in this area with the issue of nitrates in groundwater and aquifers. I was just listening to the news today. Another city in Detroit is dealing with iron problems, iron piping, and they can't drink the water. And so they have to do all kinds of remedial efforts to be able to just have water. I mean, we are blessed here in this part of the world to have lots of water, good fresh water, but that's not true for everybody. One of the things that's also related to this is the loss of biodiversity. Many of you may have seen the signs and lawns during the month of May. The lawns were no May mow. And I saw those signs and I wondered what they were for. So I looked them up, and it's a project from what's called Plant Life, which is a British conservation charity that's working internationally to save threatened wildflowers and fungi. And so it was an effort, they say, to try to encourage and allow various flowers, yes, even dandelions, and fungi to begin growing during the critical growing month of May. So to give them kind of a leg up in their growth. And Francis is very clear that there is no debate about the environmental crisis, and these topics and others are very much shows us what's happening to our common home. And he doesn't speak to this, but it's becoming much more common for all of us in this area, are the so-called PFAS chemicals. I've looked up what PFAS stands for, perfluoroalkyl substances. And they are described as the forever chemical. And it's the kind of chemical that's put on non-stick coatings, is put on stain repellent fabrics. It's part of firefighting foams. And I saw in Eau Claire, in their water, that they are very seriously experiencing the PFAS in there and going to kind of investigate just how extensive it is. So those are just some of the things that the Pope referred to in trying to describe what's happening in our common home. The next chapter, number 2, next slide, please, is the Gospel of Creation. And what Pope Francis wants to do is to review sacred scripture, and I'm going to do a little bit more of that at the end, and to look at a theological perspective on caring for creation. And he says Christians realize that their responsibility within creation and their duty towards nature and the Creator are an essential part of our faith. If you remember during the Eucharistic prayer number 4, the priest prays this: "You have entrusted the whole world to our care, so that in serving you, the Creator, we may have dominion over all creatures." So it's not only a part of our faith, it's very much a part of our very worship experience as well. And I love this sentence. He says, soil, water, mountains, everything is, as it were, a caress of God. What a beautiful image to have. So if you read nothing else of the Encyclical, this particular chapter is very good spiritual reading. So the next slide. Yes, he speaks about the human roots of the ecological crisis. And he again affirms the technological paradigm, which proudly boasts about its advances in scientific understanding, the medical solutions like the vaccine so quickly prepared, and the communication systems. But, he says, we have lost a consciousness of what the effects are on the environment and human development. He says this, the fact is that contemporary man is not been trained to use power well, because our immense technological development has not been accompanied by a development of human responsibility, values, and conscience. Powerful, powerful challenge. And the Pope identifies three main reasons for this crisis. First of all is this big word, anthropocentrism. Anthropocentrism. In other words, everything revolves around us, around the human person. And this is the kind of perspective that creates a domination model for the story of creation. We have power over creation to do what we please. That's our thinking. What serves our species, the human species, is the basis for all decisions that are made. It's really a very self-centered way of looking at things. And thirdly, or secondly rather, he says indifference, apathy, which almost seems to say that there is no deliberate choice that we can make to try to improve things. And finally, technology. You cannot solely rely on it for solutions because sometimes it can be the source of the problem. So those three kind of areas he cites as the human roots of the ecological crisis. The next slide. Integral ecology. Those always seem to be such big, frightening words. But what he attempts to do is to provide a unifying vision for the future. He writes about ecosystems, because it's not just a question of solving a particular problem, but of recognizing the interrelatedness between the economy, people, environment, and culture. He talks about economic ecology. In other words, the protection of the environment is an integral part of any development, that are part of any development wherever it may take place. And that the process for any kind of ecological development, economic development is also to look at that ecology issue. It's not a peripheral issue. It's a very important issue. He talks about cultural ecology. In other words, preserving the cultural treasures of our humanity. If you remember a number of years ago, the bishops of the world had a synod on the Amazon. And it was being a way to try to look at the Amazon, which are called the lungs of the world, the lungs of the earth, but also to try to preserve the traditions of the people who live there, because these are the people who are maintaining the land, who are remaining on the land and will care for it best. And so this is almost a cultural ecology, to really reverence people's traditions. And what kind of world, he says, do we want to leave to those who come after us, to the children who are now growing up? What traditions, what gifts we want to pass on to them? That's kind of the cultural ecology. And finally, he just very simply talks about the ecology of daily life, housing, transportation, healthy food, and safety. So all of those are not separate issues, but all issues of the one kind of common approach to try to help with with the climate change problem. The next slide. So he outlines a kind of a lines of approach and action. And what he suggests is several various types of dialogues which can help us escape the spiral of self-destruction, which currently engulfs us. And really, it is a practical call for political engagement. The Paris peace talks, of course, were very clear. And the upcoming United Nations Climate Change Conference that's coming up in Glasgow, Scotland, in a few days. And it's a time when to be able to see that this is not just America's problem, it's not just Africa's problem, it's the world problem. And when Laudato Si was written, it was written right before in 2015, right before the Paris climate talks. And there was an intention of Pope Francis to influence the world leaders that gathered there to seriously consider the climate change and to look at it with different lenses, different ways of seeing it rather than in self-preservation. In other words, there should be, the climate change that continues to evolve, international collaboration, and always to have this be in collaboration with one another, but always with the aim of the common good, of trying to protect human development. And the final slide. Next slide, please. Oh, here it is, I'm sorry. Ecological education and spirituality. What Francis is basically advocating here is a new lifestyle. He referred to what in that chapter, he referred to the Earth Charter. And this was created back in 1992 to develop a global consensus statement of values and principles for a sustainable future. And the Charter presents 16 principles to accept and to implement as the foundation for sustaining our planet. And I'm just going to cite 3 of the principles. Number 1, protect and restore the integrity of Earth's ecological systems with special concern for biological diversity and the natural processes that sustain life. Secondly, to treat all living beings with respect and consideration. And thirdly, to promote a culture of tolerance, nonviolence, and peace. So those in summary form are the 6 chapters of the Encyclical Laudato Si. I've always appreciated Francis's writing because it is very readable. It doesn't rely on churchy kinds of language, but sometimes is very folksy. And in this encyclical, I think is very practical. And Laudato Si is a challenging read because of its scientific analysis, because of the economic terminology that it uses. But its most challenging quality is the demand for the reader, for you and me, to have a change of heart, to have a change of attitude. Francis is really placing a mirror before us and asking us to take an honest look at ourselves, because the source of the threats to our world are found in the human heart, in our heart. The Greek word for the gospel tradition is for this change of heart is called Metanoia. And it means a change of thinking. It means a way of looking at our instinctive mindset, things that we're instinctively how we respond instinctively, and to our favorite habits and behaviors. There is a Greek word in the New Testament, sclerocardia. It means hardness of heart. And sounds like a disease, which it probably could be. And the word sounds like a disease, but what it does is we usually think of a hard-hearted person as severe, as someone who has no understanding, someone who's unapproachable, compassionate, uncompassionate. But Jesus uses the term to describe a person who has no understanding and thus has lost the capacity to be moved, to change, to expand. Such a person experiences no regret and can see no reason for changing directions. And this is what Francis is asking us to do, is to soften our hearts, to be able to look deeply within us and to exercise that fundamental principle of spiritual growth, which is self-knowledge. That is to say, whenever we honestly and humbly examine our hearts and minds, acknowledging our gifts as well as our shadow sides, we are, by God's grace, able to change and to have our vocation to holiness become true. So what I'd like to do now is just to spend some time on the chapter of the Gospel of Creation. So if you go to the next slide, please. This is a message by John Paul II back in 1990. Christians, in their turn, realize that their responsibility within creation and their duty toward nature and the Creator are an essential part of their faith. In other words, our Christian convictions relate directly to our ecological commitments, and our ecological commitments should reflect our Christian convictions. So what does our faith teach us? What does our faith lay out for us as important principles to guide us in our decision making? Next slide. First of all, the mystery of the universe. Whenever we deal with mystery, we're dealing with things that are beyond our control in one way or another. And the uniqueness of Francis' perspective is to broaden our vision. That is to say, he makes a distinction between nature, which are systems we can study, understand, and thus control, and creation, which is a gift of a loving God. The difference between nature and creation. Next slide. Because he says, a spirituality which forgets God as all-powerful and creator is not acceptable. So our faith teaches us that the beginning of life, in the life in which we live, is the result of a choice by a loving God. I don't know if you ever think about that. Our life is based on the choice that God makes. And St. Augustine has that great line, is that God loves us like an only child. And that's just a beautiful concept and image to have. Next slide. And this is the wisdom of the Old Testament. For you, God, love all things that exist, detest should be none of the things that you have made, for you would not have made anything if you have hated it. Therefore, because God looks on creation with love, then we are to look with love on creation. And love does not exploit, but it respects. Love renews, it does not exhaust. Love enhances life and does not cause death. Love is incredibly strong, but it's also very fragile. Therefore, human love for creation is expressed by enabling all of creation to become what God created it to be. For all creation is intended to move together to a fulfillment in God. That is to say, creation is from God and has a dynamic toward God. Next slide. But we have a contemporary myth that we have to deal with. The myth is, because we have more understanding of the laws of nature, we think we have the ability to do two things: to control, guide, and direct it. Secondly, nature is unlimited in its ability to grow, progress, and regenerate. But the paradox of life is that while it is incredibly strong and has its own laws, it is also incredibly fragile, and we are responsible for taking good care of it. Next slide. The work of the church seeks not only to remind everyone of the duty to care for nature, but at the same time, she must above all protect mankind from self-destruction. We have this common refrain, I think, today that we hear, I don't need God, I don't need church, I don't need religion, because I can find God in nature. But it's not either or. I like to think it's both and. That is to say, all of us have experienced the divine in nature. It is not so much experienced in our heads, but also in our bodies, our feelings, our senses. For example, the mountaintop view, the beauty of flying over the clouds, the horizon on the sea, coasting downhill on a bike or skis. These are all visceral connections with the divine, with the other. And it is when we pay attention to this connection that we place ourselves in relationship to the world around us. Next slide. God wills the interdependence of creatures, the sun and the moon, the cedar and the little flower, the eagle and the sparrow, the spectacle of their countless diversities and inequalities tells us that no creature is self-sufficient. Creatures exist only in dependence on each other, to complete each other, in service of each other. Next slide. The dignity of the human person. This is what our faith teaches us. That God saw everything that God had made, and behold, it was very good. This is the basis for the church's stance against all the threats to human life, from abortion to euthanasia, to capital punishment, to trafficking, to war, to racism. Next slide, please. Each of us is the result of a thought of God. What a beautiful thought that is. Each is willed, each of us is loved, and each of us is necessary. Therefore, if we promote and protect human life and dignity, then we have to protect the environment in which the human family lives. Next slide. There is that original innocence. The intent of the Creator was harmony of creation. The two creation stories reflect that intent. God put man in the garden to till it and to keep it. That is to say, God gives him everything to till, namely cultivating, plowing, working the land. And God gave it to keep, caring for it, protecting it, overseeing it, preserving it. That is the context to truly understand what dominion means. That is to say, not to misuse and abuse creation, not to forget the integrity of creation. It is all intended to work in harmony. And when one element of creation is threatened, like water or air or soil, then all creation is in danger. Next slide. So what is original sin? It's the disruption of the harmony of creation. The Bible has no place for a tyrannical anthropocentrism unconcerned for other creatures, is what Pope Francis wrote. Next slide. Each creature possesses its own particular goodness and perfection. Each of the various creatures, willed in its own being, reflects in its own way a ray of God's infinite wisdom and goodness. Man must therefore respect the particular goodness of every creature to avoid any disordered use of things. And of course, the story of Cain and Abel is an example of a loss of balance in creation. That is to say, when I no longer consider myself my brother's keeper, that I am not responsible for cultivating a harmony between us, then all of my relationships, whether it's with God, neighbor, and the earth, are disrupted and they are ruined. The Old Testament always illustrates that God offers to correct those disruptions. Again and again, he tries to disrupt what human decisions have made. He sends Noah, he sends the prophets, he established the Sabbath laws, the Jubilee years, all in an attempt to bring harmony once again to all of creation. And so the Pope wisely points out that there cannot be an attitude of compassion and concern for our planet if that same attitude is absent from our attitude toward one another, and vice versa. Jesus himself reflects the Creator's creative and loving attitude towards nature. He said, look at the birds of the sky, look at the grain of wheat, look at the fruit of the vine. In other words, our whole sacramental life and prayer is basically an expression of our connection to the elements of nature, water and wine and bread, touch. And Jesus himself lived in harmony with creation. He worked with his hands, calmed the sea, walked the fields, fed the people with bread and fish. And in our faith teaches us that the resurrection is the assurance of the fullness of life for all of us. But it is also a vision of a new life that all of life is destined to experience. So without a sense of the sacredness of the world, we will struggle to recognize and accept the sacredness that is within each one of us. And without a sense of the sacred within each one of us, we will struggle to recognize and reverence the sacredness of the world. So the Pope's holistic perspective on the issue of environment can be called, the next slide, please, kind of a creation spirituality. That is to say, the view that all creation, nature, humans, all living creatures, the universe, find their origin in God and have their fulfillment in God. Many of you may remember back in the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of writing and discussion about creation spirituality. There was Matthew Fox. There was also Thomas Berry. Next slide. Thomas Berry wrote this: the human being is the one in whom creation, the universe, has become conscious of itself. In other words, we are able to be aware of all this creation that God has given us. But this perspective of seeing the dynamic, organic process of creation begun by God, with humankind, us, being cooperators in the process, is a vision that can also be recognized many centuries ago in Francis of Assisi, in Hildegard of Bingen, Julian of Norwich, all of the spiritual writers back in the Middle Ages. The environmental crisis has triggered a rethinking of our relationship with nature, and our faith is what provides a fresh lens through which to view the situation. The next slide. We are creation too. I think we lose that. We always kind of sense to separate ourselves from creation and want to take care of creation, but we are creation too. And even natural science points to the fact that we share the same elements with the rest of creation, carbon and iron and nitrogen and oxygen. Therefore, when we talk about the care for creation, we are talking about taking care of ourselves and creation. We are kind of joined at the hip. We rely on creation to sustain us because we cannot live without it. And creation relies on us in order to sustain us. Thus our attitude is not dominance, and it's not really stewardship of creation, but rather kinship with creation, to see that we are together as well. So the Holy Father had so many wonderful things to say about creation and our responsibility with us. But when we come to the end of his encyclical, it's a chapter that, or a phrase that I think is just incredible to keep in mind. And this quote that ends the encyclical was a quote that kind of tweaked the image of Linda Chase. And she is a composer and a teacher. And when she read the encyclical, she was moved by this passage toward the end, and it inspired her to compose music. And one of the pieces of music is called The Joy of Our Hope. And so I'd like you to join me in listening to that music, but also to reflect on the beautiful gift of creation God has called us to care for, what God calls our common home. And the encyclical is not only a call to action, but it is especially an encouragement to all people, especially Christians, to develop new habits and new ways of seeing the world itself. Indeed, the environment is a pro-life issue. Our own comfort needs to have a wake-up call to be attentive to the uncomfortable of the world. And the Holy Father encourages us to continue to be faithful to what our faith teaches us. And this is what he said toward the end of the encyclical. We come together to take charge of this home which has been entrusted to us, knowing that all the good which exists here will be taken up into the heavenly feast. In union with all creatures, we journey through this land seeking God. For if the world has a beginning, and if it has been created, we must inquire who gave it this beginning and who was its creator. So let us sing as we go, and may our struggles and our concern for this planet never take away the joy of our hope. So let us listen and let us view some scenes. So cue the music, and there we go.
Jenny's got to take herself off mute. We're not hearing the music.
Give me 1 minute. I think I have to reshare with volume. Sorry about that.
That's the only glitch. Don't worry.
struggles, may our concerns for our planet never take away the joy of our hope, never take away the joy of our hope. Let us sing as we go. Let us sing as we go. May we never lose the joy of our hope. Let us sing as we go. Journey together. We are entrusted. God the Creator offers strength and light we need to continue in the heart of the world. God's love is always near. Let us sing. Let us sing as we go. Let us sing as we go. May we never lose the joy of our hope. Let us sing as we go.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Father, and for ending on such a beautiful, positive note, literally. I'd love a discussion. We have another 20 minutes or so of Zoom time. So if everyone would like to, wants to stay on, would like to unmute and offer comments, reactions, questions for Father or Father Steve, any of us. I think a short discussion would be really, really good. The problems facing our planet, us included, in that creation are immense, and it can feel overwhelming at times, and it's sometimes a struggle to maintain hope, but I think putting it all in the context of our faith and creation, I think it's just a very powerful message and a very huge motivator for why we should do this sort of work and make it uppermost in our minds. So I'd love to hear from the rest of you.
Okay, Father.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Well, Father,
Yes.
did he mention anything about pantheism?
No.
Because I get mixed up. I'll sit here in my living room and I'll be saying my rosary and thinking, well, wait, is this all this love I have? Because we have a big window in our living room. And I look out and I think, oh my Lord, it's so beautiful, so lovely. But I think more about that instead of worshiping like tamarack that I got outside. You know, I don't think I worship the land, but then I think, am I overdoing it with, buying a great real organic seed or more organic food and like, is junk food all right? Probably isn't. I know it's not, but plastic bags and everything, chips bags and all that. But I just, you
I
know,
think-
pantheism is out. All those isms are out, if you ask me. You know,
Lucy, I think that one of the important messages of Pope Francis is that each of us in our own living situation needs to be conscious of how we can be contributing to the life of creation rather than the destruction of it. And we all do that in different ways. I planted my first garden this year. And it was very successful because everybody accused me. They were all accusing me that I watered it with holy water. So that's why it was so fertile and abundant. And I mean, it was just a little bit of, and I had vegetables, and my father used to grow canna lilies, and the big tall ones, the red ones. And that was my contribution to his memory. And they really did well. They're like 9-10 feet tall. And so I tried to gather a little food for myself and friends. And fortunately, the rabbits never discovered it. And so it was plentiful. But I think how each of us in our own way can just say, how do we contribute to the life? And how do we not destroy life all around us? And when you look out at nature, Lucy, I think the greatest word that you can continually use is thank you. Thank you, God, for the gift of life and life that surrounds me all the time. Because
thank you for telling me that, Father.
okay, thank you.
Something that struck me tonight, maybe the human origins of the ecological crisis, that section. I think denial was one of those. Somebody said to me not so long ago that people would rather cling to an easy lie than face a hard truth. And if there's a hard truth, it's the ecological crisis before us. And so I think, this denial, it's so overwhelming that people have to cling to some other truth or they feel it'll be swept away. And if that's true, then, maybe for us to give reasons for hope and to give small steps that we can do to kind of break that paralysis and that denial. If people saw that we can do something about this, that maybe it would break them open to facing the whole issue. Just a thought that came during the presentation tonight.
Yeah, and again, Steve, I think that it's a matter of what lens do we look through? How do we see what's happening around us? Is it the lens of faith? Did the words that we use reflect our gospel perspective, or do they reflect a political perspective? In terms of just listen to the words that are used for those who choose not to get a vaccine. And rather than talking in terms of what is the good and common good for my brothers and sisters, it's a question of freedom. Okay, freedom is good, but freedom is not, doing anything you want. But I think just in the use of the terms that we use, I think kind of reflect what our attitudes are. And the thing that I'd like to very especially about Pope Francis, and I kind of put an emphasis on it, is we have these instinctive outlooks that are nurtured by our past, our experiences, and how do we take a deep dive into those kind of responses? And when I work with people in spiritual direction, I basically say spiritual direction is looking at how we respond to our responses. And so therefore, that's a kind of a deep dive into why do I get this feeling of anger? Why do I feel this feeling of hopelessness or powerlessness? Where is that coming from? And that takes courage, takes the grace of God as well. But I think if us and we as a community, strive to try to do that together, then I think that in our own little way, we can contribute. Yes, it is overwhelming. And so I think it's just a question of to be hopeful and put that hope into some kind of personal kind of practice and action.
I think Pope Francis, you pointed out how he's used the term responsibility and duty. I mean, it's a strong statement that this is, we live on this planet. This is the only home we know, and we have a responsibility to think about these things and care for our earth.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see that with this conference in Glasgow that's going to be happening. Pope Francis was going to go to it, but he's not going to go to it now. In terms of just I think it's the 5th meeting or 4th meeting since Paris Agreement that they're coming together to talk about things. And now, it's just it's a long-term thing. These are not short, quick fixes. It's just an organic kind of thing. Do what we can.
The scientists have said we have 10, 12 years to get it right. And so I think time is really important. It is a factor, whether it's 10 years or 15 or 20 or the point is that we need to get started now.
And it begins, with us inside.
Right.
I heard too that the water in the oceans are because of human crap, waste or refuse, junk, trash is going to be depleted by 2040. And when I heard that, I was like watching how much water I use in the kitchen sink or bathroom or whatever. And because when I heard that, I think I told my daughter that when we were out east, and I don't think they believe, Brian doesn't believe me, but they said that. And I thought maybe it isn't going to be that way because we are such a throwaway society. And so I don't know.
Well, it's a reminder.
80%. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Father.
It's a reminder, Lucy, that again, sometimes those kind of alarming shock statements can kind of numb us to a point where we just get paralyzed.
Right. It sure numbed me. I don't think it's going to happen.
Well, I think we just have.
Parachute on wastewater.
I think that we all have to be smart and to be able to widen our understanding of the issues. And what are our sources to get that information. I think around here water is, and I think water is going to be the next reason for war. It's just
I think so. Land,
and we're blessed with it here. And so how do we take care of what we have here so that we can be good stewards?
Well, in the western part of the U.S., water is a priceless commodity, and there have been battles fought over the rights to who gets what water, especially amongst ranchers and the farmers. I mean, they've gotten a little more peaceful about it and taken it to courts, but back in the days, it was pretty nasty out there.
It's like the sheep herders and the cattlemen centuries ago out west.
It's a very similar thing, yes. I'm happy to be living here. My daughter lives in Utah and she wanted me to move out there. No, I like it here better. It's pretty out there. Well, Utah is a beautiful state and it got quite the scenery, but they don't have a whole lot of water either.
No.
Sherry.
I think I have to say, call on the spirit of Ray Strike. I think some people know him. He always was taking encyclicals and statements from the bishops and saying, we have to, these are words that we have to pay attention to I don't know if I'm saying it right, but it reminds me of that. Like all of these words in these encyclicals are so wonderfully stated, but unless we give them life, then what good is all the words on paper? And Father, you did such a good job. I stayed with the whole thing, even though I heard it before. I'm a slow learner. But it just, the more I heard it, the more it just brings life to the words of the encyclicals and the bishop's letters. I mean, 20 years ago, they said about this stuff.
Right.
Yes,
I
Sherry,
agree. I really,
beautifully said. Tina, sorry.
no, it's okay. I just really appreciate it too. I mean, I checked out the book from the library quite a while ago, a couple of times, and it's just so good to hear your words. And it's like, I know that, but it's very helpful. And I do think the hope, we have to have hope, and I guess through our faith and more than just this life. My concern is, you know, what we're leaving for young people, and with things, how things are with, you know, schools and problems. And we just got back from Milwaukee visiting our daughter and meeting some of her refugee students, and just, oh, the violence. And, you know, I mean, it's like, okay, keep forward, you know, we need to find hope in I guess in life. And
Wrong with hope. Wrong with hope.
Yeah,
In many ways, this beautiful message of our faith, of Christ, of these encyclicals. It makes me love my church more, knowing that this body of social teaching exists, and reading a bit of, and I think it's a way truly to have a sustainable world. If we could live by these ideas and these values, we would seek the common good. We wouldn't think always first of ourselves. We would, you know. So it's truly a message of, I'm not saying the answer, but it really would be if we would all join together. And Sherry, I really liked how you said that we have to give the Pope's words life in our own lives and actions.
And I'd like to say too that Father Dennis, you talked about just what someone was saying about that people say that I find God in nature, I don't need to go to church. But I think Father Dennis, you said that you would argue that we could have both.
right.
And I like that. Like you can have a vehicle, a car, or apartment, or a home, but you also do acts that are supportive of the less fortunate as well. And so you can do both. And so I thought that was interesting. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it's really good. Well said.
Well,
So where are we going with this environmental issue at Holy Spirit Parish, Susan?
where would you like us to go? This is of the people here, this committee. We try to listen and kind of take gentle steps in one direction, thinking that we want this framed, because this is within our church. We want it framed in all of this wonderful social teaching, because there is a whole moral aspect to our attitudes and actions toward the environment. And so I think there's possibility that Julie Meadows would work with us to put together something on Hildegard von Bingen, maybe for Earth Week, actually. And Father, you mentioned
Right.
Hildegard and Julian of Norwich. So I'd like to learn more about what she wrote about our relationship with nature. You know, the other thing, I can't help but think of John Sweeney in our 3 days with him, focusing on Francis of Assisi and how this fits. It's truly is a seamless kind of garment here with. So Father, thank you so much for
You're welcome.
coming and speaking with us. Yeah, Sue.
I just was thinking when I was growing up, and maybe it was the same when you were growing up, you would turn the water on when you were going to brush your teeth and you would let it run the whole time you were brushing your teeth, even though you weren't using it the whole time. Well, when somebody told me that was wasteful, that was like, really? I never thought about that. We can all do little things at home, like take your own bags to the store. And if you do happen to get plastic bags, reuse them for something else. We can all make little dents, maybe being wiser food buyers, so we're not wasting so much food. I think all those little steps will help. Obviously, they're not going to solve the big problem, but they will help. That's just my thought.
Good thought.
Yes.
I get plastic bags from the grocery store, they get them back.
Yep, me too.
We use them for our little trash bag, not bags, but little waste baskets around upstairs, downstairs, main floor, basement. We've got them all.
I do too, but those all end up in the landfill.
Yeah,
When you-
they
when you
do
put 'em in the
eventually,
garbage.
yeah.
Susan,
Speaking of
maybe,
landfills, there is a hill along Highway 41 over by Oshkosh. That when I was a young person was not there.
I know.
And it's there now because it was a garbage landfill that they made into a pretty good sized hill. It's almost like a small mountain for these
Right.
parts anyway, because over there it's pretty flat like it is around here.
Mhm.
So, I mean, you think
Right.
about all our garbage, you go, oh my God.
So if we can reduce some of that, right, Sue and Denver and Carol, you had something.
yeah, well, Susan, maybe I was thinking you could share with the group on here who may not know what's going to be happening next weekend at Holy Spirit, what your committee is doing.
Yes.
your
it'd be
display.
good. Well, we have Arlene Meyerhofer to thank. She has worked tirelessly to go to various stores and find all sorts of recyclables that we can buy instead of throwaways. Well, recyclables in this, some of them are throwaway, but they are compostables. So they can, disintegrate if you have them. So anyway, our committee requested a table for a week, October 23rd through the 30th in the ministry center. And she's going to have a display of those materials along with little lists of where she got them and where we could go to get them. So it surprised her because there's so much more available than she even thought. So
That's great.
thanks, Carol. Father.
Let's go on from the 30th to the 31st to Saturday. At our diocesan convocation, there are 2 breakouts on social justice. Joanna Jacoby, a native of Stevens Point, who's been doing amazing things in the field of social justice all of her life. The first session, she's going to present sort of teaching of the church, but in the second one, it'll be people from the Portage County Deanery coming together to talk about what could we tackle as a deanery church in the issues of justice. And boy, I would think environmental concerns would be a pretty easy place for us to begin. And so you would all be welcome to come and sit at that table and to help coordinate with people from other parishes who are interested. What is something we could accomplish in the future here in our area?
Mm-hmm.
That's Revive, Is that what it's called? Steve, the Revive Convocation?
Yes, the Revive Convocation.
And if you haven't signed up, Father Steve has how to sign up in his pondering today. So,
Oh, good. Okay.
Thank
so you can go on, you can go to your email and grab the information.
Thanks, Carol.
Or Dennis, Father Dennis, we can also send it to you if you don't have access to the ponderings. I can email you the information if you'd like, or Susan can.
Either way is fine. That's
Okay.
fine.
Okay, we'll get it to you.
I'll be there in
Yes.
the morning, so.
Oh, you'll be there tomorrow morning?
No, I'll be there in the morning for the Revive.
Oh, you're going to be there. Okay.
Right, you could just sign up then. Okay, so you're going to be there, so you can come and join our sessions.
Well, don't see that, right? I'm going to be the homilist at the mass, so.
Oh, okay. Okay, I hadn't heard who was going to be the homilist. Maybe Father Steve was. All right.
So you do
Perfect.
know about it.
Well, Father Ed said, you know, you were a dean back in the 90s, you know, in the last century. So
How kind.
I remember that.
He didn't share with us at our last meeting who was going to be the homilist. He just said he was talking to somebody. So we didn't know who was going to be the homilist. Okay. Well, yeah, if you haven't signed up for sessions though, please feel free to, come or sign up for any of the sessions. So, that you'd like to attend that day, or just come on in. There'll be room in any of them.
Okay.
Thank you. I think the idea of being able to hear what other churches in our deanery are doing in terms of social justice in general would be very interesting. And then to take that a little further, Father, you and Father Lynch too, are you a member of the Big Tent? Do you meet also with ecumenically with other pastors in our area?
I do not.
But
I'm supposed to be retired and
sure. No, but I don't you think down the road, a session on the environment and approaches of different denominations, different faiths, and what their social teaching has been, I think we'll find a lot of common ground on that. And it would be really interesting to have a session like that. And I'm so looking forward to meeting in person. Zoom is great because we could still get together tonight, and when we planned this, of course, in September, we didn't really, or actually August, we started planning. We didn't really know what the situation was going to be with COVID, so we decided to just go with Zoom. But thank you all for coming, and
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Father Dennis.
you're welcome.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes.
Very
Thank
much.
you, Father Dennis.
Thank you so much. And let's keep this idea alive.
Thank you, Susan.
He wants
Thank you,
to say hi.
Father
Come here.
Dennis.
And thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, she
And
wanted to
yes.
say hi, and then she realized she was on video, and now she doesn't want to say hi.
Tell her to come.
She just bolted in the other room. She wanted to though. I thought she might want to, and she did. And then
Yeah.
3-year-old.
Anyway,
Take care.
All right.
Good
I'm
night.
signing out,
Yes.
guys.
Thanks,
Good night.
Jenny, for
Thank
all
you.
your help.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Susan, very
Yes.
successful.
Thank you. I'm going to turn off recording here. I really mean it, Jenny. I was losing a little sleep. Oh, I don't want this recorded here.